So the countries based on innovation have increased competitiveness and achieved more sustainable growth than other countries. Now, I will show a little bit of graph to start with. And here we are, we have in this x-axis the GDP, where our income to some extent. And Sri Lanka, we are like $3,000 or something. So we are right at the bottom here. Now, look at the scale. This is a log scale and the earning capacity of a particular country and the innovations. Now, if you look at it, India, China are very large populations because the size of the circle will indicate the population. And see the US is here somewhere. But see this tiny one, Switzerland. Switzerland has got 8 million population. And they're right nearly at the top in both ways, being innovative as well as the GDP. Now, this shows that the size of the population, like we have 22 million, and it's not a restricting factor when we come to innovation. So we can really go forward with this. So just to give a little bit of background to Professor Veranja, and this is a very informal meeting. I'll call him Veranja during the meeting. And he's currently the commissioner of the Sri Lanka Inventors Commission. So he's got the background knowledge as well as the driving capacity to promote science and technology in Sri Lanka. And he's also the Vice Chancellor of Sri Lanka Technology Campus. So this is why it makes it so important for us to talk to him, let him speak, and also try to help whatever the way we can to promote this venture in Sri Lanka. Now, he's also formerly the chairman of the Intellectual Property Advisory Commission of Sri Lanka. He's also formerly the chairman of the Technology and also a council member of the National Research Council. He is a University of Colombo graduate with a first class in chemistry. And he's got a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry from University of British Columbia in Canada. And he's been the head of Department of Chemistry in Peradeniya. He's been a science team leader at Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology. He's been the Associate Director of Science and Strategies Relations and a Vice Chancellor of the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology. Further, we need to recognize this is all his reflections of the current knowledge he has. So he's got a huge amount of knowledge that will promote what we want to do in Sri Lanka. Say, for example, he's received the Knight of the Order Academic Palms. This is an academic award from France, Presidential Award for Research, NSF Award as National Science Foundation Research for Science Excellence, SLAS Lifetime Achievement Award, and he supervises 27 PhD research students and 15 MPhil students, at least 192 authorships, inventor of 17 patents. Now, this is crucial, and he's got an H index of 41. Now, H index reflects the impact that somebody has made in the world with his research and publications. So this is crucial. H index of 41 is not easy to get. I've done 20 years of research during my clinical career. Mine is still only 19. I know how hard it is to get this up to such a high level. So that reflection is important, and that is why we need to listen to this kind of person and then also try to support the mission that he wants to take forward. So welcome to this, but I just want to share a little bit of video about where the government is heading. I'm glad at least the government has taken some interest to do science and technology promotion, but we need to promote and tell the politicians too what areas they need to focus. So this is what I'm going to do for the next two slides, and then we'll even invite Professor Veranja to talk. So this is from very recent budget speech from a very young MP, Hasara. Just listen to that. She's trying to talk about the need to align the facilities in under one ministry.
විදිහට ආණ්ඩුවක් විදිහට අපිට නිසි ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් අපි සලසා ගන්න ඕනි කියන එක අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා. ඒ නිසා තමයි විද්‍යාව හා තාක්ෂණ අමාත්‍යාංශය යටතේ අපිට මූලික වශයෙන් ආයතන 12ක සැකැස්මක් තියෙනවා. අමාත්‍යතුමනි, සභාපතිතුමනි, මම මේ අවස්ථාවේදී කියන්න කැමතියි කලින් මේ අමාත්‍යාංශය ගත්තොත් මේ අමාත්‍යාංශයට යටත් විය යුතුයයි අපි සැලකන විවිධ ආයතන වෙනත් අමාත්‍යාංශ යටතේ තමයි තිබිලා තියෙන්නේ. මේක කලින් ආණ්ඩු ගත්තොත් විශේෂයෙන් අපි ගත්තොත් කලින් තිබුණ තාක්ෂණ අමාත්‍යාංශය ඒ තුල තිබිලා තියෙන ගොඩක් දේවල් අද වෙද්දී අපි විධිමත් විදිහට විද්‍යාත්මකව ඩිජිටල් අමාත්‍යාංශයත් එක්ක බද්ධ කරලා තියෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම අද අපේ ආණ්ඩුව යටතේ මේ කැබිනට් අමාත්‍යාංශය යටතේ තියෙන ආයතන කලින් ආණ්ඩුවල කැබිනට් අමාත්‍යාංශවල ගත්තොත් ඒවැයි අධ්‍යාපන අමාත්‍යාංශය යටතේ තමයි මේ විද්‍යාව හා තාක්ෂණයට අදාළ ගොඩක් ආයතන තිබිලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒතර අපිට මේකෙන් පැහැදිලි වෙන දේ තමයි සභාපතිතුමනි මේ ආයතන අතර සම්බන්ධීකරණයක් නොමැති වෙන ප්‍රධාන හේතුවක් විදිහට අපිට මේක හඳුනා ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ කියන්නේ ආයතන මට්ටමේ කිසිම විද්‍යාත්මක බැඳීමක් එහෙම නැත්නම් විද්‍යාත්මක සම්බන්ධයක් තිබිලත් නැහැ. ඒ නිසා පළමු කොටම අපි හඳුනාගත් දෙයක් තමයි මෙන්න මේ ආයතන අතර සම්බන්ධීකරණයක් පවත්වා ගැනීම අපි විසින් ආණ්ඩුවක් විදිහට විශේෂයෙන් කළ යුතුයි කියලා. Why nations fail කියන කෘතියේ සඳහන් වෙනවා රටක ආයතන පද්ධතිය බිඳ වැටුනහම රාජ්‍යාන්ත්‍රණයක් බිඳ වැටෙනවා එවිට සමස්ත රාජ්‍යයේම ක්‍රියාකාරීත්වයක් බිඳ වැටෙනවා කියලා. ඒ නිසා තමයි මේක න්‍යායාත්මකව විතරක් නෙමෙයි ගරු සභාපතිතුමනි ප්‍රායෝගික තලයේ මිනිස්සු විදිහට පුරවැසියෝ විදිහට මේ ආයතනික අතර සම්බන්ධයක් නොමැති වීම කියන එක ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් නොමැති වීම කියන එකේ විඳිතය බවට පත් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම රටේ පුරවැසියෝ. අපි දන්නවා සාමාන්‍ය මිනිස්සේ තමන්ගේ වැඩක් කරගන්න ආයතනයකට ගියාට පස්සේ කර්මාන්තයක් වේවා තමන්ගේ පේටන්ට් එකක් ලබා ගැනීම වේවා ලියාපදිංචියක් වගේ ඊටම සරල කාරණාවකදී පවා අපි දැකලා තියෙනවා අතනින් මෙතනට යන්න මෙතනින් අතනට යන්න කියලා ඊටම රස්තියාදු වෙමින් සමහර තමන්ගේ කටයුතු සිද්ධ කරගන්න වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම තමයි ඇතැම් අවස්ථාවන් වලදී රාජ්‍ය ආයතන ඇත්තටම තමන්ගේ කාර්යය එලෙසින්ම සිද්ධ කරනවා. අපි දන්නවා ඔවුන් තමන්ගේ උපරිමය සිද්ධ කරනවා කියලා. හැබැයි මේ සිද්ධ කරන දේ කාර්යක්ෂමතාවය හා ඵලදායීත්වය සමහර වෙලාවට නැති වෙලා යනවා. මේ ආයතන අතර ගන්න තීරණ සම්බන්ධව සම්බන්ධීකරණයක් නොමැති වීමත් මෙන්න මේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති අතර අපි දැක්ක ගැටලුවක්. ඒ නිසා තමයි අපි පළමු කොටම මේ ආයතනික සැකැස්ම තනි ව්‍යුහයක් අතට ගන්න මෙවර අපි උත්සාහ කළා තියෙන්නේ.
Now you will see there's some kind of motivation within the government, which is very good. But I must say, I'm happy to tell that science and technology is a key need for development. I mean, can you point to a finger for any developed country where the science and technology at the moment not in the front line? They are continuously evolving their science and technology, and we have to get involved. So, Sinhalen කියන්න ඕනේ මේ ටික. මොකද there are three areas that you need to focus to develop science and technology. එකක් තමයි investment in education and skills. There are several aspects, but I highlight something more relevant for the political supporters as well. Fostering innovation and entrepreneurship and promoting a culture of science and technology. Now, if you say investment in education and skills කියලා කිව්වතින් STEM education කියලා අපි අහලා තියෙනවා. හැම රටේම STEM education. මොකද STEM education කියන්නේ science, technology, engineering and mathematics. But අපිට problem එකක් තියෙන්නේ අපි මේ evolving science ගැන දැනගන්න නම් අපි මොන හරි medium එකක් තියෙනවා මේක දැනගන්න විදියට. ඒක තමයි අපිට English education has to go parallel. English නැතුව අපිට මේ ඔක්කොම දැනගන්න විදියක් නැහැ. හැබැයි ඒක lifelong education එකක් වෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ පොඩි කාලේ ඉඳන් මේක පටන් ගන්න ඕනේ. දිගටම ඒක අප්ඩේට් වෙන විදියකට continuous program එකකුත් තියෙන්න ඕනේ science ගැන ඉගෙන ගන්න. So ඒක නිසා තමයි අපිට STEM කියන එක STEEM කියලා ප්‍රාර කරන්න වෙනවා. E කියන්නේ English add කරලා මොකද මේක ඉස්සරහින් තියාගන්න. ඒක එකක්. අනිත් එක තමයි attract and retain talent. ලංකාවේ අය brain drain කියලා එළියට යනව නෙමෙයි talented අය ලංකාවේ තියාගෙන වැඩ කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියලා බලන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් තියෙන technological advances එක සමහර ලාවට ලංකාවේ අය වෙන තැනක වැඩ කරන වෙලාවට ලංකාවේ වැඩ කරන්නත් හරි ගස් ගන්න පුළුවන්. So ඉතින් ඒක නිසා ඒ collaboration එක කරන්නත් ඕනේ. ඒ අතරම අපි research and development කරන්නත් ඕනේ. මේ green වලින් දාලා තියෙන්නේ ඊටාම වැදගත් දේවල්. අපේ මේ ආණ්ඩුවටත් එකතු වෙලා කරන්න පුළුවන් දේවල්. එතකොට අනිත් එක තමයි fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. ඒ කියන්නේ infrastructures හදන්නත් උදව් වෙන්න ඕනේ ensure access to advanced infrastructure including research facilities, data centers and high speed internet. Now ඒක කෙරීගෙන යනවා ඒ වුණාට ඒක ගැන focus කරන එක හොඳයි. මොකද මේක continuous development එකක් ඕන නිසා. ඊට පස්සේ promoting culture of science and technology රටේ මේක ගැන culture එකක් ඇති කරන්න ඕන නම් පළවෙනි දේ වෙන රටවල් වල වගේ සයන්ස් මියුසියම් එකක්වත් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. අදිගානේ ලංකාවේ අය හොයාගත්ත දේවල්, පේටන්ට් කරපු දේවල්. අනිත් මිනිස්සුන්ට දැනගන්න ඉස්කෝලවල ළමයින්ට ගිහිල්ලා බලන්න තැනක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම තැනක් තියෙන විත්‍යක් මම නම් දන්නේ නැහැ. බට් ඒ වුණාට එහෙම පොඩි තැනක් හරි තියෙනවා නම් ඒක ප්‍රොමෝට් කරන්න ඕනේ. මොකද සයන්ස් ඇන්ඩ් ටෙක්නොලොජි මියුසියම් වලින් තමයි අපිත් සමහර දේවල් ඉගෙන ගත්තේ මේ පිට රටවල ඉන්නකොට. ඉතින් ඒක නිසා ගොඩක් දේවල් කරන්න පුළුවන්. and ප්‍රොෆෙසර් වෙරංජා ඇවිල්ලා ඉන්නේ. ප්‍රොෆෙසර් වෙරංජාගේ පොඩි ප්‍රොබ්ලම් එකක් තියෙනවා ටෙක්නොලොජිකලි. මොකද මේ අද හොඳටම වැස්ස සහ ඉන්ටර්නෙට් ප්‍රොබ්ලම් එකක් තියෙනවා කියලා කට කිව්වා. අපි බලමු අපි කොහොමද කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. Professor Veranja, thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's Murphy's law operating. If something goes wrong, it will go wrong, and
That's fine.
I couldn't access the Zoom through my laptop, so it's on my handphone. My talk is on my laptop. So since you told me that this is the discussion, I'll try to, if matters get restored, I'll go back to the presentation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, let's do a chat and a discussion, and hope the people will understand without pictures and slides what I'm about to say.
Okay. I'll just make an announcement. If people keep their videos off but put it on when they're talking, so the broadband issues will not crop up. Sometimes it does happen. So I'll keep the videos off as well.
All right.
So you can do here.
So people can hear?
Yeah, we can hear well.
Okay. Yeah, so if you look at, I think you gave an introduction to this research and development scenario in Sri Lanka. I have 2022 statistics prepared by the National Science Foundation. And these statistics are more relevant than if I were to get 2024 statistics, because money written on paper will not have been spent. So my accuracy is less. So 2022 numbers are, these monies have been spent. So the numbers that I'm going to give you are probably more accurate than otherwise. So as you know, in 2022, Sri Lanka had a GDP of 25 billion report based on the annual report of Central Bank. And we have spent gross domestic expenditure on research and development has been about 25,000 million rupees. So that's 25 billion. As a percentage of GDP, this is about 0.10. But this statistic doesn't really, so one would think that the government is spending 0.10, 25 billion rupees on R&D. But the story is not quite that, because if you look at the percentage of money given to various sectors, higher education gets 28%, government R&D research institutes get about 27%, and if you look at business enterprises, that's the private sector, spends, they don't get anything, spends about 41%. So this 0.10%, which many Sri Lankans and who live here and abroad think that that's the money spent by government, but it's really about 60% is only spent by the government. Other 40% is spent by private sector. And there are companies now in engineering, in textile, in product development, materials development, which are spending millions of dollars on their research. So GERD, the gross domestic expenditure, is $82 million. That's the amount that I talked to you about. It's roughly about 1 million rupees per inhabitant, if you count our population to be 22 million. So with that, unfortunately, 87% of that goes to recurrent and only about 3% to capital. Now, you might ask me, is this amount is this 25 million, 40% of which is spent by the private sector. So surely the private sector doesn't spend money on our state universities. So this is for state universities, all our state research institutes, gets about, not 25 billion, roughly about half of it, right? About 6% of it. So it's really a minuscule amount, whereas people erroneously assumed that it was 0.10% totally and 25 billion. That's not the case. So basically, we are in a, as Chula mentioned, situation can only get better. I'm sorry again. Chula has to tell everyone that I'm unable to join my internet on Zoom on my laptop, and I didn't prepare myself to this eventuality, so it's gone wrong. So there is a power cut going on, and every time I phone them and they try to do something, there is a lot of lightning. I think April showers have come little before April in Sri Lanka, Colombo. So this is the case. So Sri Lanka gross expenditure on R&D is about, I told you, 0.10%, 40% of which comes from the private sector. So the government spends only 60%. India is about 0.64%. But then the global average is about 2% in developed countries. Pakistan is about close to us. And if you look at the global research money spent is about $3 trillion, 95% of which is spent by the top 20 economies of the world. So it's only 5%, and Sri Lanka is in that 5%. So that's the issue that we face with. And to come out of a hole like this that we have been in for decades now requires a very creative, innovative thinking. And you might tell me, if it is a funding issue, can the government double the amount that is spent, right? Now, we must remember, as time goes by, when I come to these numbers, you might think that, do we have the researchers to, if we were to get double the amount of research money for research? Sri Lanka has a head count of researchers, including technicians, about 6,200 people, right? So these are called head count of researchers. Actually, full-time equivalent of researchers is only 2,150. And so basically, per million people, we have only about 96 people doing research per million people, which is really a low number considering that we are only 22 million. India's number is 160, but then India's population is 1.4 billion. So the number of researchers are astronomically high, proportionately, pro rata. US per million is 4,000 in US, but then US population is only 330 million. India is 1.4 billion. So there are more scientists in India than in the US, by analogy. So these numbers are very poor. 96, this is in 2022. And as you know, 2022 was a difficult year there was almost no research funding in terms of research grants in Sri Lanka in 2022. So this made things worse. And a lot of PhDs between the ages of 30 to 40 left the country, and we lost them. So I keep telling this fact at public fora, that the fact that our baby pool has kind of disappeared, the nursery has disappeared, it doesn't mean that we are going to do well in the future. In another 20 years, the researchers who are in their 40s now, when they reach the age of 50, we're going to miss this generation of researchers who left the country. We're going to miss them. And that's really bad. Going forwards, so we have only 96 researchers per million population. Human resources, if you look at human resources, higher education sectors, if you take higher education, is more than the government, and business is less. Business is half of that, of the government and higher education. So business is very efficient in terms of human resources when it comes to doing research. Natural sciences, if you look at the gender ratios, in many areas, females do a lot better than they used to 20, 30 years ago. So in natural sciences, there are 800 something males to about 790 females, total of 1,600. Agricultural sciences, again, 50-50 for males, females, about 900, a little less. Engineering and technology, we have 1,400 total, but there is a gender bias there. There are way more males than females. And medical sciences has 1,231 total researchers. There are less males than females. So roughly, females are 750, whereas males are only 480. So total, again, that's where the 6,200 comes. So we're discussing a minuscule amount of researchers, and we're just trying to divide them into buckets and trying to make sense out of it. But earlier I said doubling the money allocated for research doesn't solve the problem, because if we were to double our NSF and NRC research funding, National Research Council and National Science Foundation research funding, we don't have enough researchers to do the research that kind of money will demand from the scientist. So increasing the money isn't the issue. We need to increase human capacity. We need to increase the numbers of scientists here. Okay, so that's the situation. Let's go to the next slide. So roughly, educational qualifications. Where are we there? Doctoral or equivalent, we're supposed to have had in 2022, 1,300 males and 1,100 females, a total of 2,960. And I'm afraid that doctoral or equivalent is the key word there, equivalent. So this probably counts the MDs in the medical field as well. So really not doctoral, equivalent is the issue. I'm not so sure whether we had 2,400 PhDs in Sri Lanka in 2022. The number was less. MPhils about 480. We're supposed to have had masters 1,700 and bachelors 1,400 roughly. So the up until bachelors, the males and females are neck and neck. Males are like 47%, females 53%, but then once you go to tertiary educations like NDT, NVQ level exams, female numbers drop dramatically and males numbers go up, because males go for these 2-year programs where NDT or NVQ level 5 and 6 programs, mostly males take them. So that's where the educational qualifications lie. Now, performance and output indicators of research. What is the performance? We have had about the number of patent registrations in 2022 was about 80 resident patents, that's Sri Lankan patents applications. Number of patents by non-residents, about 110 higher. So non-residents would ideally apply for a patent when a patent originates from a foreign country, and when it reaches the national phase filing level, that is after about 31 months after the original filing of the patent, you apply for the national level, and then Sri Lanka, based on the product the patent is for, they could apply in Sri Lanka also. So that's 110. Those are really not our patents. We could be getting income out of them, but sometimes not. So the total number of patents filed, A and B, both areas included, it's 190. And if you now go to the publications of Sri Lankan scientists in SCI index journals, this SCI index, co or expanded, is about almost 1,500 per for that year. So that's a big enough number. If you really look at per capita rupees spent for research grants only, right? The amount of that 25 million state sector research grants is only about 500 million disbursed by National Research Council and National Science Foundation. It's only half a billion rupees. So if you divide these numbers, that 1,500 papers in SCI journals by Sri Lankan scientists. So this is an absolute number. There are no, I mean, the address is a Sri Lankan address, right? There may be foreign authors, but the address is a Sri Lankan address. So if you count, we spent only $500 million rupees, which is like a couple of, like $2.5 million, and we get 1,500 publications. That's not a bad average. Actually, that's better than the US. US spends way more per publication than Sri Lanka appears to spend. And these are not shabby. These are not poor publications. They are in SCI journals. So it's not lack of talent, obviously. It just things don't seem to click together very well. So these patents come in number of areas. Let's keep that part. We discussed about the patents. So if you look at commercialization and innovation, so that's the output. Innovations, commercialization of new products and services and processes, government R&D institutes, only 16, very poor. Business enterprises, that's the private sector, almost 1,000. And the higher education sector, 36. So we've commercialized about 1,050 new products, services, and processes. So if you look at all these commercialization of improved existing products, commercialization of new plant varieties in agriculture, you would think the government research institutes would do better. No, there again, the private sector is 62 products they have commercialized, state sector only 6. So commercialization of import substitutes, commercialization of designs and prototypes, all of that, the private sector wins the game completely. State sector lags behind totally. So although the 60% of the money is spent by the state sector, our productivity in the state sector is extremely poor, right? And only 40% of the money is spent by the private sector. They seem to be, their output is much higher. If you look at then output or research, these publications, I said 1,500 papers. How many foreign authors are there in these papers? That's important, right? Now, if you take a natural sciences, total number of publications, only 507 papers. And of that, 340 papers are with foreign co-authorships. This is roughly 50-50 in engineering and technology. Now, you can see engineering and technology total publications is only about 274 compared to natural sciences. But there is more money spent on engineering. And that extra money comes from the private sector. There are private sector companies which do engineering and engineering products. So although state sector universities may not be doing a lot of research in engineering, the private sector does the useful work. And if you look at medical sciences, again, 474 papers, out of which 326 are with foreign authors. And so in totality, the 1,500 papers, little over 1,000 papers are with foreign co-authorship. So that seems to be, I mean, there's basically nothing wrong with it, especially in modern era of interdisciplinary research. Having foreigners co-authoring is important, but at the same time, if we depend too much on foreign co-authorships, that just suggests that our basic research ecosystem is not well funded. So we have to depend on scientists from more developed countries to do analysis for us and to do various inputs that we may be lacking here. So, so from 2014 till 2020, if you look at our dependence on foreign authors, it has roughly remained the same. No change to write home about in terms of our dependence on foreign collaborators in putting a complete manuscript out and being published. If you look at that's that, but if you look at the world at large, and the 10 largest economies, US, China, Germany, Japan, India, UK, France, Italy, Canada, and Brazil, right? If you look at the GDP in US dollars, US is almost 30 trillion, and Brazil is also at the bottom, 10th, is also 2.3 trillion. So together, these 10 countries count about $80 trillion. Now, the total GDP of the world is probably around 150 trillion or 160 trillion. So these 10 countries earn half of that amount of money. And the rest are behind that, right? And ours is a very minuscule amount of GDP contribution to the global GDP. So it is not a strange phenomenon then. If you count the Global Innovation Index, called GII, Sri Lanka is 89 in the Global Innovation Index of 133 countries. Now, remarkably, countries like China with that population, because population is important indicator in determining Global Innovation Index, China is number 11 and India is number 39. So those are remarkable achievements if you really look at it. And Sri Lanka at 89 hasn't really gone up since for the last 6, 7, 8 years. Our Global Innovation Index, we are not competitive. I mean, if you look at the competitiveness index, we are fallen behind remarkably, or it's in keeping with our Global Innovation Index as well. So all these things tend to corroborate with each other. The biggest issue is input is low into research, no question about it. And that input is not just the government money, right? We should not make a mistake there. Government money is low, we know that. And I told you, even if it were to double tomorrow, we don't have enough researchers to use that money. So it's not just the money component, we don't have enough scientists. And I will, as I go along, I will talk about this. So if publications are the forerunner to innovations and commercializations that are going to come up at the end of the value chain, how do we determine the impact of publications? And we have 1,500, which is not bad. That's a good base. We should be able to do something. For that, all institutions must be research informed. Every university, every research institute, private or public, must be research informed. It must be research based. It must be research active. It must be research led, and it must be research intensive. So the last 2 points, are our institutes and universities research led? Are the leaders leading researchers? The answer is no. So as a result, when the leaders are not research leaders, the institute is not research intensive. We may be research active. There are many researchers who are active, We are obviously research-based to some degree. We are research-informed, for sure. We teach undergraduates, right? To teach, you need to be up with the material. So these questions arise, and I will talk more about that easily. Now, scientific research became modern scientific research only in the past 3 to 4 centuries, right? So, as you remember, Newton's presentation of Principia in front of the Royal Society probably ushered the new era of scientific research. Since then, there is nothing called Sri Lankan science. Some seem to have the wrong notion there. It's all global science. And it's a recognized activity, and it involves many stakeholders. It involves researchers who are principal investigators, junior co-workers, support staff, supervisors, colleagues, peers, funding agencies for sure, and the governments, which expect scientists to come up with products which can be commercialized through this research. And then, of course, we have to deal with publishers, editors of these journals, and the general public and the taxpayers who ought to become the beneficiaries of research that we talk about, right? And research grants. Now in Sri Lanka, having been in this arena for decades, one of the biggest drawbacks that I see in the research grants, which is only about 500 million rupees. I mean, it still is a lot for many. Research grants are based mostly on a research project which lasts only about 3 years. After that, you have to reapply for another grant. And very few grants are awarded for career development. So as a result, researchers drop out after obtaining their promotions. This is a big issue, right? You apply for a couple of grants, publish maybe 10 papers, probably enough to become a professor in the Sri Lankan context these days, and then after that, you drop out of the system. Whereas those who have published throughout their publishing career, they run into issues of finding research grant money. Because unlike US and unlike other developed countries, or unlike even India, there are no career development grants. So if you've done well in the last 5 years, the government should continue to fund you based on the same research you're doing. So that is a huge drawback in this country where many don't participate. For me, when I advise young scientists, I tell them that until you publish 10 papers, you have not returned the point of no return. For a scientist to get to the point of no return means you got to publish 10 papers. As you know, being a scientist and an academic is like being a priest. This is a priesthood, right? And we know that our priests also, if they stay in robes for about 10 years, they are very unlikely to derobe and become laypersons. So similarly, scientists, I mean, to publish your first 10 papers is such an enormous hill to climb, that we all remember how we struggled to publish those 10 papers. And then we thought that number 10 will never arrive. And it did. And it went even higher after that. So people have lost faith in these research grants. Because, I mean, if you have only 500 million people and then you have so many academic institutes, now there are 17 universities, and everybody wants to become a professor. Everybody needs to publish. So everyone wants some money to do some work, right? And many of the new universities don't have well-equipped labs. So that's why the big universities tend to always do better than the smaller and the newly developed universities. So sharing of knowledge, publication is shared knowledge based on common understanding of some aspect of physical and social world. And these days, research publications in peer-reviewed journals, if you look at, or if you imagine, since you can't see the slides, if you imagine that you are running with a paper down some road, and there are so many impediments to overcome. Impediments of people who are wielding swords, sticks, knives, everything, and you have to go past. And then finally, there is that guy in a black robe whose face is covered, who is the reviewer of your paper, who rejects your paper for giving no reasons. Paper is just rejected because I don't like the address from Sri Lanka. So these are huge issues. And the most scientists find this journey very arduous. When I was younger, when internet was not there, when everything was snail mail, when I received comments from a reviewer in a printed envelope, so I sit with a glass of water before I read the comments, because many a times, more often than not, comments are very toxic. Comments sometimes suggest that maybe you should stop being a scientist here. Your work is so bad, right? You should think of changing your career. So these are very difficult, and I will talk about some of these things as we go along. Now, a paper is an organized description of a hypothesis, data, conclusions, intended to instruct the reader. So that's what a paper is, right? If the research does not generate a paper, it might as well not have been done. Great chemist called George Whiteside said that there's really no point in doing work if you don't publish them. And there's another saying, if it wasn't published, it wasn't done. So publications are critically important, and doing research is important, but publishing is equally important, and we need to understand that. So giving a few practical tips to anyone in the audience who may be young enough to for the advice to be useful to them. You have to actively seek out critical readers, co-authors, and peers to provide comments on your drafts. Important. And try to anticipate the points of criticisms from the reviewers. Reviewers always write bad comments. Very rarely does a reviewer agree totally with what you have done. So your first article, I'm sure many of you, your first article, you wrote it 15 times, 15 drafts. That's not uncommon, right? Because to make it perfect, you're just getting used to the style of writing. How do you do an introduction? How do you do the discussion? How do you discuss your results? These are enormously difficult when you're publishing your first paper. And then your best articles that you'd ever write, I'm sure many of you have written really good articles. I'm sure they got at least 5 to 10 rejections. This is very common. Getting rejections is exceptionally common. And what it teaches in the modern context is every time your paper is rejected, you learn some deficiency of your paper from the comments of the reviewers, and you try to improve it and then send it to another journal. So you have to run after your articles. And these days, especially publishing from a country like Sri Lanka, to publish a lot of papers it doesn't mean that you've been successful, because success is a relative term. When Chula introduced me, Chula gave me a lot of accolades, but everything of those accolades are relative. But what he said about me only indicates, not that I'm good, that's relative. Good compared to whom? There are many people, thousands who are better than me in the world. So it proves that I have worked very hard. Hard work is not subjected to relativistic interpretations. Hard work is hard work. I have worked hard, that's for sure, because navigating, graduating your PhD students and getting their papers published, it takes 5 years. And as Shula said, I should feel much older than I do, because each student of PhD, forget MPhils, takes 5 years, and that's 5 years of life spent with the student, right? During that period, the student matures, student might get married, might even get divorced. They will have kids. And through all that, the supervisor is the constant reminder that the student who is doing the bench work maybe has a path forward after graduation. So measuring the impact, I want to start this topic. Who is afraid of the H-index? And Chula talked about H-index a lot. H-index measures the impact and productivity of a scholar. A scholar with an H-index of H has published H papers with at least H citations each. So that's the H-index. So what is a good H-index? Hirsch, that's why we call it H-index. His name was Hirsch. When Hirsch proposed this, he said H-index of 20 is good. And he said H-index of 40 may be outstanding and 60 exceptional. But these are all relative. There are people in big named universities in the US who have H-indexes of 200. So what is 40? When there are people with 200. So these achievements are totally relative, can be achievements in the local context where you operated in this country. And there are Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and physics who had H-indexes of less than 30. So again, that's relative. He was doing such good work, he forgot to publish. That's why his H-index is low. So we can discuss, but then sometimes it gives an indicator. And one of the things that I take credit for is University Grants Commission in 2018 issued a Commission Circular number 5, where it took me 10 years to develop the minimum H-index value to qualify to tiers within the university system. In fact, Professor Malik Ranasinghe, who was the former Vice Chancellor of University of Moratuwa, joined with me, and together we worked on this endeavor for 10 years, and finally the UGC accepted only because both of us were able to convince FUTA, which is the trade union of academics, that to accept it. There were objections. FUTA doesn't like to be taught on academic things. FUTA wants to decide on how the promotion scheme works. So this we think is an achievement. So it divides academics into 5 tiers. Tier 1, we say your H-index need to be only 0, doesn't matter. And tier 2, your H-index needs to be only about 2. Tier 3, little higher, 7, 6. Tier 4, 13, 11. Medical sciences, the H-index achievement levels are a little higher because medical journals, especially from a country like Sri Lanka, tropical medicine gets cited a little more than pure sciences and mathematics. So tier 4 for a medical person needs to be only 20. Tier 4 for pure science, except mathematics, need to be only 17. And tier 4 for agriculture needs to be only 14. And tier 4 for arts, humanities, and so on needs to be only 11. So these are, by global standard, these are modest achievements. The purpose was never to recognize tier 4-star academics. That was not the purpose. And most universities, big universities, have done that. They have felicitated their tier 4-star. The intended purpose of this document was to monitor the tier 1 academics from 0 upwards through their career and to determine at what point do they pass these tiers of 2, 3, 4, and 4-star. I hope that is taking place. I hope that the spirit of this system is understood by the researchers. If so, it will serve a purpose going forward. Now, not all articles are the same, as you know. Research articles, review articles, case studies, they're all different, right? And disciplinary cultures exist. History versus immunology, for example, very different. So, journal impact factors are also very different. The New England Journal of Medicine has an impact factor of 96. Lancet has an impact factor of 98. Chemical Reviews, my own area, has an impact factor of 51. Journal of American Medical Association has an impact factor of 61. And then Nature Reviews, cancer has an impact factor of 72, and our own, the only index journal in Sri Lanka, Journal of National Science Foundation, has an impact factor of 0.68. And then Quarterly Journal of Economics has only, that's the best journal of economics, has only an impact factor of 20. So these are all relative. We need to understand the journals we are publishing, but in your areas, some of the impact factors that I gave you makes you realize the degree of difficulty that you would face if you were to publish in these high impact factor journals. And also in research, as you all know, there is also the Matthew effect. Now, Matthew is the guy who said the rich gets richer and poor gets poorer. That applies to research also, not just to money or the stock market. It's a centrifugal effect. High journal rankings are self-perpetuating. Hard for new journals to break into high rankings. Very hard. Because people who publish in high-ranking journals get cited more, and therefore the journal impact factor goes up. So non-English language citations are definitely undercounted, for sure. Papers in journals in Brazil, for example, or in Spanish, in French, they're undercounted, right? And Matthew effect only shows that those who have power and economic and social capital can use those resources to gain more power and more capital. So the Matthew effect applies in scientific research also, and unfortunately, we are not immune to it. Science is always international, right? There is no science which is called Sri Lankan science. I must say that. The best way for me to exemplify this, since you don't see the slide, let me tell you the story. And some of you are old enough, I'm sure, in this audience, for having read the cartoon series called Peanuts. Peanuts is a little dog who does very, funny things. It's a cartoon series. So Peanut has submitted an article to a magazine. Now, this is the plight of a Sri Lankan academic, Sri Lankan scientist, who sends an article to a Western country, a high-impact article, particularly. So Peanut gets a letter from the publisher. It says, "Dear contributor, thank you for submitting your story to our magazine. To save time, we are enclosing 2 rejection slips, one for this story and one for the next one you're going to send us." So this truly exemplifies, the Peanuts exemplifies the difficulties of trying to publish with a Sri Lankan address. And that's one of the reasons why journals tend to believe you that your data is okay if one of the co-authors comes from a more advanced country. But that's the thing that we have to do. And the research culture is important because culture must be there. I mean, this is the intangible. To develop a research culture, you might need a little bit of money, but not a lot. But research culture is to nurture the nursery scientists who are in the nursery so that they, when they get to their 50s and 60s, can turn back and teach the younger scientists. So culture is the whole product of an individual, group, or society of intelligent beings. It includes technology, art, science, and moral systems, right? And research is a learned behavior. No one is born with research in its head. We learn things in secondary school, degrees, careers, and the research culture is the structure that gives that behavior significance and allows us to understand and appreciate and evaluate the research activity we do. So our paper, our publication is within the context of the research culture that you inhabit, that cultural space. And the cultural structure based on a behavior of staff and students allows us to transfer that knowledge gained through the systematic process of what is called the scientific method to our students and society. The important thing is we transfer that knowledge in today's setting, not yesterday's, along with the ability to analyze the evidence in the context of tomorrow. So this is critical for transferring the knowledge that you have to your students whom you mentor. It is developed in today's setting with the ability to analyze it in the context of tomorrow. So it needs to be relevant not only for today, but also tomorrow as well. So for that to happen, structure is the culture that we must try to build on continuous development. We must advise our younger colleagues the importance of continuous development. We cannot afford to stop researching, learning, or we run the risk that our teaching will suffer and lose its relevance in the context of tomorrow. That's the most important thing. So research culture cannot be achieved quickly or easily. It's going to be as slow as the decline would be if we were to do nothing. Developing a research culture is going to be as slow as the decline would be if we were to do nothing. So these are not easy things. And research culture, developing it within a department, within a faculty, within a university is critically important thing as well as publications. You don't produce publications if you don't come from a good research culture. So no need to highlight again, Sri Lanka needs researchers in leadership positions, and that's the lacking we have, unfortunately. In most advanced countries, even heads of departments, deans of faculties, vice chancellors of universities are top researchers. Here, there is a group of academics who tend to believe that their job is to do administration, not research, and therefore the researchers should be relegated to a corner of a lab to do research and publish and give some rankings to the university. So that's a fallacy that we must come out of, and Sri Lanka needs researchers in leadership positions, for sure. So all this, what is teaching us is if you are not a knowledge creator, you cannot be an effective knowledge disseminator. That's important. You must create in order to disseminate. So now I'm going to switch gears here to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that I was involved with at the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology from 2008 onwards. I was appointed or released from the University of Peradeniya to be lead science. And we were initially in the Biyagama industrial zone in the basement of a mass holding factory called Silveta. In there, we did some wonderful work, which I want to very briefly talk to you about. And the topic of this is precision release fertilizer for smart agriculture. Today, the word smart agriculture is everywhere. And the release of fertilizer is meant these days to be precise so that the fertilizer is not wasted. And this is the tale of green discovery from Sri Lanka. So we know that 50% of the Earth's habitable land is already used for agriculture. Agriculture is the primary driver of deforestation, habitat loss, and biodiversity loss. And if we don't do something about it, humanity could require more food by 2100 and maybe as high as 80% food. And our population is still increasing. Global food system is the single biggest contributor to climate change. That's the other side of the story. Responsible for around a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. And the number of people suffering from hunger on the other side has been increasing in step with the global population since 2014. So we are supposed to become from our current maybe 7.58 billion to, I don't know, next decade, whatever, to about 11 billion. We may not reach there, but ironic about this population increase by 2050 is that beyond that point, our population will start decreasing according to projections. So what they're saying is in 300 years from today, our population would come down to about 4 billion inhabitants in 300 in 300 years. So the population, that's why you don't hear alarm bells being rung about the population growth at meetings and seminars these days, because people are expecting the population to come down, but for the next couple of decades, at least, maybe 3 decades, we need to feed more people, and that's a fact. So the first 2030 Sustainable Development calls for zero hunger by 2030. We are nowhere close to that. We all know that. In Sri Lanka, the expatriates, Sri Lankans who are in this audience know that 40% are Sri Lankans at least. We've been told that have to do with only 2 meals a day, if that. So this is a tough thing. And the International Fertilizer Association, if you look at we're growing crops on soil. Soil is the medium. Estimate that 85% of the soils are globally deficient in nitrogen. Nitrogen is a big problem. 73% of soils are deficient in phosphorus and potassium, 55%. And there is no chance that at least for the next millions of years, that the plants are not going to need the NPK as the main fertilizer. Now, why NPK? Because we need to fertilize in order to get more yields, in order to feed more people, right? So this was one, I listened to a talk given by Professor Cyril Vijayasundar, who is in the audience, I believe, who said the forests don't need fertilizer. Forests make their own fertilizer. So if you give plants to enough time, they make their own fertilizer. Unfortunately, we can't give enough time for crops who feed us. So we need to add fertilizer to these. And some of you may not know, the planetary phosphorus boundary has already been transgressed in many regions of the world. We don't have phosphorus deposits. And by all phosphorus deposits in the world remaining, our Epaulo phosphate is a moderately sized phosphorus deposit. It's actually smaller than moderate, although we cry a lot about it. So phosphorus is going to be depleted. And unfortunately, the soil has enough insoluble phosphorus that has accumulated in soils, but they will slowly get into the freshwater systems, leading to eutrophication. So that's something that we had to watch out. Take the status of agriculture in Sri Lanka before I get to the topic of the research that we did. In agriculture, occupies around 40%, 2.3 million hectares of land, consumes over 80% of freshwater resources. Sad. 27%, over 2 million in the country's workforce is engaged in farming, and still this is crazy because you go to a developed country such as Denmark or something, only about 4% are doing agriculture and they export food crops. We have 27 million doing agriculture, 27% of the population doing agriculture, and we are still not producing enough food for ourselves. So that's a real paradox. That's because 80% of the food production is in the hands of smallholders, and the average yield of paddy in Sri Lanka is around 4,500 kilograms per hectare. And in Indonesia, it's about 5,000. In China, it's about 7,000. In Australia, it's about 8,000. So we're really low when it comes to those. And then the urea we add to the soil, we lose about 70 to 80% to the environment, either through dissolution in water or due to evaporation into ammonia. So major global studies have shown that conversion to organic farming is theoretically possible but unrealistic. In the past, we realized that in a hard way. Such transition would have a positive impact to our climate, no question about it. But the biggest challenge, according to research, is getting enough nitrogen into the soil. That's the biggest challenge we have. So while we argue about what the best practices should be in agriculture, research drives the point home. Food plays a major role in our good health. So we need food in order to live longer. And the planet, now we see, unlike when we were small, we see people reaching the age of 90 effortlessly these days. At least the people who come from a higher socioeconomic stratum. So we need food, we need good food. Now, how did we get here? At the dawn of the 20th century, humanity was facing a global disaster, mass starvation, long predicted for the fast-growing population. Europe was undergoing crisis, 2 wars, right? I mean, the First World War was a major disaster, was about to become reality. A call went out to the world's scientists to find a solution. And 2 chemists saved the world. You all know them, Karl Bosch and Fritz Haber, who won the Nobel Prizes in chemistry in 1918 and 1931 for the Haber process. for making ammonia, which was very easily converted to, Haber did much of that work, to urea by adding just one carbon to two nitrogens. So this revolutionized our world completely and allowed us access to urea in large scale and made us agriculture rich world, at least potentially, so that we could potentially make enough food to feed the people. Now, the question was asked in 2008 when I joined Cleantech with a team of researchers whom I will introduce, at least at the end of the presentation. We were asked by, it was Haley's Agro, can you make a slow release nitrogen fertilizer for urea? That was a question. We were a bunch of chemists, didn't know anything about agriculture. So one amongst us, and then if you look at the innovations, we were supposed to do research in nanotechnology. That's why we were there for. If you look at NIH and their funding for slow release drug research versus World Food Organization for agricultural innovations, they're like chalk and cheese, right? There are more patents for slow release drugs than there are patents for slow release fertilizer, way more. So the scale is tipped heavily in favor of slow release drugs. It looks as if we don't really care how the plant produces the crops that we eat, but we do care very much about how healthy or how drugs can keep us alive for a longer period. How ironic is such naive thinking? Food is now the modern version of the best medicine that you can ever have. So nitrogen efficiency rarely exceeds 70%, often ranges between 10 and 60%. These losses can be minimized by efficient agronomic management practices, but the nitrogen use efficiency must be addressed. Otherwise, you're not going to produce amino acids, chlorophylls, nucleic acid, ATP, phytohormones necessary to complete the biological processes such as carbon, nitrogen metabolism, photosynthesis, and protein production in plants. So this is clearly is needed. So one of us amongst us, I was the science team leader. Now Professor Nilvala Koteguda, then she was not a professor, but the work that she did propelled her to a quick professorship at the Jawaharlal University. She argued, can we use the chemistry of the water molecule? As you know, water molecule, each oxygen is hydrogen bonded to hydrogen, right? Whilst the covalent bond between a hydrogen and oxygen is around 500 kilojoules per mole, the strength of a hydrogen bond between oxygen and a hydrogen is only about 20 kilojoules per mole, much smaller. So if you can have can we use these small hydrogen bonds to make a slow release fertilizer? So the base that she suggested using was hydroxyapatite nanoparticles, which is compatible to collagen nanocomposite in our bodies. And then what was thought was the urea is NH2, carbonyl NH2, just imagine, and hydroxyapatite nanoparticles have active OH groups on its surface. Being a nanoparticle, so very small, it has very rich surface chemistry. So the idea was these OH groups on the hydroxyapatite, which is nothing but calcium phosphate nanoparticles, would hydrogen bond to the oxygen of the carbonyl group of urea and would hydrogen bond to the nitrogen NH2 of the urea molecule. So I want you to imagine that, which is simple chemistry. Now, there is no one in this audience who doesn't know what a hydrogen bond is, because almost all of you have done A-level chemistry and you were taught the hydrogen bond there. So basically, the chemistry she proposed was nothing more complicated than A-level chemistry. So the best ideas and the most brilliant ideas are the simplest, you know this, and we naively assumed that this could work. And we did prepare. It was a sol gel method, starting with calcium hydroxide, adding urea into it, and making a calcium hydroxide urea suspension, then adding phosphoric acid at a point in time and get urea hydroxyapatite suspension. And for good measure, naive as we were, we embedded this in monomarylite clay and wood chips to make it even slower release. So we did this and applied for 2 patents, US patents, which were granted in 2013, but they were applied in 2010, June. And then soon after applying for the patent, we tried to publish it. And of course, our fertilizer was inside wood, our fertilizer was inside monomarylite clay. So most of the Western good material science journals rejected us. Outrightly, they rejected us, saying they just don't understand what the wood chips are doing there. So what we did was, we rewrote the paper and published in an Indian journal, good journal called Current Science. And it was published on the 10th of July on this wood chip and monomarylite embedded fertilizer. So 4 of us in the paper, me being the senior author. And lo and behold, that's why I said, at this point, I get a call on the 14th of July at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We were still in the basement of Slinted, from a fertilizer company VP, upstream VP, called Mr. Pandey of Nagarjuna Fertilizer, Hyderabad, India, saying he was very impressed with our paper. How fortuitous that we finally, the journal that published our paper was an Indian journal. How fortuitous. So, and then in our paper, we had a pictorial diagram of a hydroxyapatite nanoparticle with 6 OH groups on the surface, which is hydrogen bonded to urea. But he said, look, and then next day he phoned again and gave us the dollar amount. I've always told my teams, fortune favors the brave. And we were brave. Even thinking that we could come up with something world-class from the basement of a Biyagama industrial promotion zone, right? As good as we may have been, we were, bunch of ordinary scientists, right? Not gifted with extraordinary skills in many ways, right? But gifted with a heart to believe that failure was never an option for us. So that mantra we kept on telling us, failure is not an option, because the government and the private sector, both, this was a public-private partnership, Clinton, had told us, if you don't do anything in 3 years, we're going to shut this down. So just 4 months to that 3-year deadline, I get the call from Dr. Pandey telling that he's willing to do this, but he gave me a dollar figure. He was going to pay $3 million for the entire transfer of patents. He knew that we had applied for 2 patents. And then in a phased process, you first transfer the technology, we'll give you half, and then the other half after they find it useful in their factories. And don't forget, Sri Lanka is not a urea producing country. India is. And we give a fertilizer subsidy for urea, but India gives a fertilizer subsidy in terms of petroleum products needed to make urea. So the cost of urea in India is a fraction of the cost of urea in Sri Lanka. So this worked for them very well, and that's why they were interested. So he told us, but your fertilizer is 1-to-1 ratio hydroxyapatite urea nanoparticles, 1-to-1. See, you have 6 OH groups on the surface of a hydroxyapatite particle. I want you to make it 1-to-6. So we tried many methods. This is why it's so important to understand how your commercializing partner envisioned your technology. The way he envisioned was 1-to-1 is no good. So this valley of death between existing resources and commercialization awaited us, and we needed to jump this massive hurdle of making it 1-to-6 from 1-to-1 ratio hydroxyapatite urea. You might say that was easy enough. We added more urea into that. All it did was, when it dried it, urea precipitated, phase separated out, and it wasn't getting bonded to hydroxyapatite nanoparticle. So the solution came by one of our team members, Dr. Asita Sirivardhana, who resolved the problem by what is called flash drying. Flash drying is a technique where you take we took a 1:6 suspension of urea, nanoparticles decorated with urea at 1:6 ratio. And how we did it earlier was he took a hot plate, a Teflon frying pan, heated it to about 100, and then put the hydroxyapatite urea 1:6 nanoparticle suspension in a paint can, and he was spraying it on the hot surface. So the hot surface instantly precipitated the suspension to a solid, and that solid was a stable, or it was a metastable 6:1 ratio, but because it had become solidified, it retained stability, and we had jumped the hurdle. So we did patent that as well in 2012. And we corresponded, or we met Nagarjuna Fertilizer in Hyderabad for a period of 1 year. I visited them 6 times with our scientists in teams. And under enormous pressure from them, each time I would take a scientist, and I realized much later that these guys who go with me to Hyderabad were totally sleep deprived. They wouldn't sleep for a week in preparation for the visit, and the tough questions they would ask us. So the last trip that we made, not mentioning the name of the person who went with me, we were going to get a $1 million check at the end of that day, meaning the morning we would fly out from Hyderabad to Colombo with money in hand. But that night, after all the discussions were over and all the pressure had been applied on scientists, we were taken out for dinner, and my senior scientist had 2 sips of scotch, I believe, and he collapsed immediately on the table. So now I am there with the guests who are going to give us money tomorrow. My researcher had collapsed on the table. So immediately I excused myself. Fortunately, he was small enough for me to carry him on my shoulders, carried him to the toilet, slapped him twice, and woke him up, washed his face, and told him, "This is no good. You better now walk. Show me your legs are stable. Start walking in front of me with a smile on your face. And when you sit down, finish your drink," which is what he did. So that's a bit of a drama that we enjoyed, but then we did the work as it was. So the fertilizer we had made, urea has 46% nitrogen. The 1:6 nanocomposite we made has 40%, very close to urea. And our first invention of urea 1:1 had only 19% nitrogen content. So it was a far inferior product. So we had elevated this to a very high level. So we did publish this in one of the highest impact journals in nanotechnology called SES Nano, which had an impact factor then of 16. I'm sure it's now over 20. And there are a number of authors in this paper. This is arguably the highest ranked science publication in Sri Lanka in an international journal where entirety of authors are Sri Lankans who had lived and worked in Sri Lanka when the paper was published. So again, fortune favors the brave. So we did field trials, 6 seasons in Batalagoda, Kurunagala, Samanture, and so on. And this was recommended, our nano fertilizer at 50% of usage, which is 50 kilograms. Fertilizer Agriculture Department recommendation is 100 kilograms per hectare. We used 50 kilograms per hectare, and the yields were higher than the normal fertilizer application. So this revealed that this fertilizer had eggs. We did produce them. We made beads out of it because the farmers wouldn't like anything else. They love the feel of urea in your hands. So we made uniform size beads, white in color, so that the farmers would have a good hand feel when they apply the fertilizer. We could make few 10 kilograms a day at Sri Lanka. But the issue was, again, let me introduce the team. I told you Dr. now Professor Nilwala Kotekoda was a senior scientist who led the science. Dr. Asita Sirivardhana, I need to mention these names. Probably several are in the audience. Dr. Gayan Priyadarshana, Dr. Chanaka Sandaruan, Mr. now maybe a doctor, Upendra Ratnayaka, Mr. Danushka Arachigi, very likely a doctor now. Dr. Nadish Madhusanka at Peradeniya Chemical Engineering Faculty Department. Dr. Imal Kamunavira in Jawadanapur Chemistry. Dr. Damayanti Dahanayak at NSBM. Mr. Sunanda Gunasekara, who was our engineer, resident engineer, who now works at MAS Automation. And Dr. Kumar Singha, who is a professor of physics at Jaipur University. So I was honored. It was a singular honor for me to be the science team leader. And as Robert Frost said, down the path not taken by others. So whilst it was a success story, whilst Nagarjuna paid us $1.5 million for this part of the work, Nagarjuna Fertilizer went into financial difficulties soon after they parted with the money to us. So these are the issues of commercializing or technology transfers. Sometimes your client dies on you, and things may not go to completion as you anticipate. So Sri Lanka being a non-urea producing country, the cost increase, there is the cost increase here. You will understand, we have to add phosphoric acid, calcium hydroxide, and then the suspension needs to be flash dried. Flash dried is high temperature. It costs money to heat anything. So the Haley's Agro, our commercial partner, said, this is expensive. We don't produce urea. If we were in India, this would be very commercially viable product, but not in Sri Lanka. As you can see, the Sri Lanka's road to commercial production is fraught with gaps. Lack of a urea plant is one of them, and lack of a single sulfuric acid plant is another thing. And an era where we're trying to commercialize rock phosphate. These two will become major impediment. But however, for us, it was a success because the government gave matching funding when we brought home $1.5 million, another $1.5 million to our Slintech coffers, which kept us going in good shape for a few more years. But remember, Confucius once said, our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail. So you might ask me, what's the future of this? So Slintech lost interest in this at a point in time because of the commercializing difficulties. So Professor Nilwala and I took it, we were two inventors of the original work, took it out of Slintech and we started working on an improved version at the Jawadanapur University with a student whose name she's doctor now, Madhavi De Silva. I'm sure she could well be in this audience. So what we have is a patented process, a PCT application, a patented process for not a 1 to 6, but a 1 to 10 ratio, which means we are almost approaching the nitrogen ratio of urea, which is 46, almost approaching. And the method of production is just a fraction of the production of the first cost. So this is waiting to find someone who is interested with a bit of more work done. And it seems like earlier, Professor Nilwala and I go a long way back. I used to drive her nuts, I think, mostly, getting her to work harder and harder until working any harder was not possible. As is the case these days, she drives me nuts by still dragging me to do this research work with her. And with that, I want to stop my talk, and I'm sure I've taken enough time from you. And if there are any questions, Chula, I'll be happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Veranja, for that grassroots talk. because, and also major congratulations to you and your team for sharing one story about how you come out from that grassroots to the world-class patents. So you have also talked, I don't think there's anyone who could have done the kind of information that you shared with us with the current statistics and the weakness in our country and the need to promote researchers and retain them and facilitate them as well, so that we will come out of this bottom of this hole to be more of a developing or developed country. So I'm so glad at that. And also, I have half an hour or so for allow questions. But I propose that I will probably try to put this into a small publication because there's a demand from lots of people about your presentation, which I can include.
Yeah, I would be very happy to email you the slides, which I was unable to do. Had I anticipated these power issues, I may have done that,
No,
and you would have.
I think you did better because we saw you in body language, which is good. And that's always better than going into the PowerPoint presentations, which is kind of a uniform, very different kind of presentation. But
Yeah, well,
all worked well, fine. Yeah. No
okay,
problem. So I will put it I'll expect some help from you to put it to some kind of a very simple publication. So people
sure. Yeah,
in
I
the
can do
country
that.
will understand and the politicians will all understand the value of what you're saying. So that's more important so that we will promote from our own learnings. I've got lots of things to share as well. So to do better for our own country for the future. And I'll take some questions. If people raise hands, we will probably allow another half an hour and finish by 8 o'clock. And any questions from the audience? Yeah, I've got one already. Jiva, yes, Jiva.
Thank you very much, Viranja. It's a very nice, balanced, educational talk. I appreciate it. I just want to point out, I want to point out something that, you'd work a balance between two aspects of research. That is the academic research and the industrial research. And related to that is the publications, papers versus patents. So I come from, by the way, I'm a product of Peradeniya chemistry department, and I have met you a couple of times. And I am in the pharmaceutical research in the US. So in the pharmaceutical industry, we value patents heck of a lot more than papers. Our attitude towards papers is, sure, yeah, it's nice to publish them down the road. Why do you want to educate the competitor? That's our attitude regarding publication of especially the applied research. So what I see is, going back to the statistics that you presented about the expenditure and also the publication productivity of academic versus industrial environment, I think the country is heading in the right direction because the industry seems to be producing more applicable research and patents. I think that is the direction that we should go. But on the other hand, we should not forget that the universities, their responsibility is to do basic research, and they need the prestige of having publications and whatnot. I think what the country need is to push or highlight the need of the industrial research, the scientists versus technologists. I think that's what you were explaining. Towards the end of the latter part of your talk, you were explaining the importance of the technology part. I think that is what we should be promoting in the country. In that respect, I am disappointed that the industrial research institutions in the country have not, looks like, they are not pulling their weight. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jiva. Thanks a lot. And if I may just add a comment or two, I think what you say is right, and the new government quite rightly has understood, being the Commission of the Inventors Commission, which comes under the Ministry of Science and Technology. I must highlight their efforts by making a new ministry for science and technology. They have moved away from, actually, science and technology for about a decade or decade and a half was hidden inside the Ministry of Education. So now there is a full ministry, as the MP, that Chula MP speech that highlighted that fact. And secondly, as the chairman of or the commissioner of a statutory board that comes under the ministry, I must highlight this renewed focus on science, technology commercialization. There is a new office of National Initiative for Research and Development Commercialization that is being formulated, which will oversee most of the activities heading towards commercialization. And there is some funding that was given to it through this budget. And then, of course, you have the ministry with its 11, 12, 13 statutory bodies which are supporting this event. And I think this, Sri Lankans have proven time and time again, we can do it. It's just that we need to be focused and we need to be serious and we need to spend time on it. And I think that effort, the renewed effort, is much to be appreciated.
Thank you, Veranja. Yes, there's another question from Rupa Pursingh.
Oh, hi. Veranjan, thank you very
Rupa.
much for the
How
excellent talk. Even without the proper internet connections, that shows how well prepared are you for this event and also your knowledge in the science and technology. I want to congratulate on that. And my question kind of relate to the previous question, and you answered this partially for the when the person asked the previous question. So my area is in engineering. I'm a graduate from Peradeniya campus in civil engineering. Now I'm in Los Angeles. I'm heading the technology department here, and I have visited some campuses, technology faculties in Sri Lanka as well as engineering faculties. So in my question is about applied science or engineering and technology. So there's a concept called CDIO, conceive, design, implement, and operate in applied science. So when we talk about the technology, mostly they are expert in implementing and operating. So the concept is conceive, design, implement, and operate. This is a framework in engineering or technology education. So technology, people are known for implementers and who know well to operate. In other words, to get the job done. Now, in your talk, you talk about patents, that is commercialization, and also about high-level publications and all that. Now, as you know, in Sri Lanka, there are several technology faculties came up recently, and they are trying to get the Institute of Engineers Sri Lanka accreditation, and they only have the undergraduate programs, and they even don't have the graduate program. So my question to you is to come to a level field. How do you bring these technology faculties? I understand your university also have a technology program, engineering technology, and how do you bring them up to speed? What kind of help the Sri Lanka has for these people to encourage and to be brave, so that they can be brave? Then the fortune will shine upon them.
I think, Rupa, the technology stream at the A level, if you are familiar with it, the technology as a subject in A level, and then they do a couple of other subjects, 3 subjects. It's compared to a student who does physics and chemistry, right? Their knowledge of physics and chemistry is not high. However, I mean, there is some physics, chemistry that they learn. So, because the whole idea is for them to become technologists. So I think without fundamentals of the science, sometimes it's difficult to become do the technology that you might need to. But I think, to be fair, I think you'd agree with me. Artificial intelligence these days provide many models for coming up with a design of new products, design of technological methods. I think AI could help. Now, for example, your technology, you lack some basic knowledge in thermodynamics in order to take the product forward, right? You need to know thermodynamics at that point. So, AI could tell you, look, I think you need to brush up on this, and then make a prototype of what you need, and so that I think AI has a role in this. So the technology faculties, in and of itself, in Sri Lanka there is this issue of engineering schools in Sri Lanka. Now, as technology came, they were looking very suspiciously at technology faculties because they didn't want them to be engineers. And then the scientists, on the other hand, looked suspiciously at the technologists, saying, look, we don't want them to be scientists. So they were kind of left to their own devices for a while. But I think now, as you say, they're coming through this background of mutual suspicion and not being understood by either party, science or engineering. So I think they will eventually bear fruit. I know that these technology faculties at the products they put out, but I think IESL accreditation, the way our IESL works in Sri Lanka, that may be a bit of a tall order, but I think eventually, given time, technology would flourish. Rupa.
Thank you. So my particular question is, for example, like places like National Science Foundation, when they give grants, how they cannot be competitive as you or other scientists or other engineers who have been established. I mean, the faculties have been established for years. So is there any consideration for these new faculties to come up to certain special grants or some consideration like that?
I am not aware of special grants to technologies, but if they do apply, now, for example, the National Research Council has a granting scheme called public-private partnerships, right? So the National Science Research Council will give X number of rupees, provided they can get a commercial partner who likes that product and will invest another X quantum into research. So I think the technology faculties can benefit from these public-private partnerships because a private company is not going to come forward to put money into research unless the research is closer to a product. So I think that's one area where technology faculties could benefit, but then most of the other investigator-driven grants are mostly for basic sciences and some small amount for applied sciences. Because at the end of the day, you must satisfy the appetite of academics to get their promotions, right? So, and to get promotions, they need to publish. So whether that helps the country directly or not is the question. But I think the technology faculties should be recognized, I agree, given grants so that they become the conduit to take some of these things forward on a faster path than the people in the sciences.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that discussion, Veranja. And also, since you brought up the topic of AI, artificial intelligence, which is still at very preliminary development, 30th of March, that is in 2 weeks' time, I am holding an open forum. So anyone, if you are interested to talk about it a little bit, just let me know, because it's a very important subject we talk now, because Sri Lanka should be prepared to face it. And the AI could be just like fire. It could help you cook and eat and survive, or it can burn you to death as well. So that's what it is. With that, but we'll discuss that on 30th of March. And Gracian has got a question. Gracian.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, right. Few comments. First, thank you, Professor Karunaratne, for that very informative and inspiring presentation. Thank you and your team for that excellent discovery, invention. I would like to comment on a few things. One, you mentioned about the technological leadership at the universities, the research teams, and all that. Then the private sector is coughing up only 40% of the research, national research budget. One of the problems in the private sector is the composition of the leadership of the private sector. Say, for instance, if you take the stock market, Colombo Stock Exchange, in the companies, the main the key, the most profitable companies are the banks and the real estate companies. That is a big problem. And these companies are driven by non-technical people. They don't understand technology. They don't understand science. They are trying to make money out of the things that they know. So we can make money out of the things that we know, or we can start making money from knowing things. So there has to be a strategic approach to this issue. Second thing that I would like to sort of bring to the attention is that the readership. So if we don't cultivate the readership among the students from a young age, I can remember when we were small, we were reading Vidya Mama in the Mihira Pattare, Joseph Dennis Takure, and then Anurasi Pereira. He was writing about science in Sinhala. I don't know who is doing that right now. I'm not in tune with that. And also the novels that we read, the fiction that we read, like Alexander Dumas' The Black Tulip. So that was something that grips you, that gives you the sort of the scientific the curiosity, etc. So there are other issues that cause this particular scenario that we are in, the hole that we are in, as you said. So we need to look at outside the well-trodden paths for a very complete integrated answer. Thank you.
Yeah. What you say is right. Although there is a lot of discussion about science and technology at forums like this, those newspaper articles that we read in science have totally all but disappeared from newspapers. There are no science writers in newspapers now. Partly because a lot of emphasis in the A-level education goes to students becoming doctors and less interest in others. Now, at the time that we did our A-levels, when I was 16, I had decided I was going to do chemistry, and medicine was not an option for me. And there were many students who gave up engineering and medicine and came to do chemistry, physics, and so on. So that doesn't happen anymore. Science is unattractive because I wish there were Kumar Sangakkara's in science who make money. Kumar made money by playing cricket. So there are no science doesn't seem to give money to people, right? So if you're a scientist, your pecking order in Sri Lanka is you have lawyers, doctors, accountants, scientists barely make it to the bottom level. So those are issues, societal issues, because still people are under the wrong impression that it used to be doing medicine was a good way to earn money, but not anymore. There are many other things that are there, many other jobs that are there, which pay more money than doing medicine, and with a better work-life balance. So I think those are issues, and with respect to the leadership, as you said, Sri Lanka needs to understand that institutions must have leaders who are bent on science. We mustn't reward people who don't do research and who want to become vice chancellors, deans, and so on. I'm not trying to denigrate this, but I think that we cannot elevate the system if we go down continuously down that path, which we seem to have done since independence. The researchers don't get heard of. I may have been an exception because, the SLITEC at that time wanted us to, on a leave of absence, to come and lead science. And, we were successful. And that enabled the government to build a massive nanoscience park at Omagama. I worked there for a few years, but most of my productive work was done in the basement of that Silueta MS mass holding factory. So the younger scientists now enjoy the big buildings. But I think, the main success of SLINTEC we need to emulate. It is a public-private, but run as a private company, right? So that's the model that became successful. And there, we had no official cars. There were no drivers for us. We just managed and did our science and worked hard. And in the team that I talked about, those kids worked. I mean, there were experiments that you needed to do overnight. These guys never slept, right? They slept in the lab. So that kind of attitude only comes if there is a private sector set up there. I mean, at SLINTEC, early days of SLINTEC in 2008, we had one policy, that is never to have meetings, right? All approvals were given on email at 2:30 in the morning. If I wake up, I see an email, I approve it. So that the person to whom the email is applicable is starting the work at 7 o'clock in the morning. So, no bureaucracy. Meetings were only there to discuss science progress. There were no other meetings. So those were the reasons for success. And I think we need to emulate that. If that thing became successful, we can repeat it through the same model. And that's my take on that. Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you both, Grishan and Veranja, for that explanation. And I've got two more people who raised their hands, but I'll probably have to stop after that because we nearly come into 2 hours now. And we will take on and follow on as we go. And I just have to say, what do you say? I mean, best ideas come in the corridors and coffee tables. And let's ask Lakshman to talk about. Lakshman, yes, Lakshman.
Thank you, Chula. Thank you, Veranja.
Yeah, thanks, Lakshman.
For your excellent presentation. I think Chula missed to invite the Science and Technology Minister for today's forum. It's an excellent presentation. I think the minister should have been here to listen to Veranja, right?
We can send the video to him if you have the link.
Yeah.
I invited 2 MPs, but they had other engagements.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go through a few points. Now, I would like to compare the situation in Sri Lanka with India first, South Korea, and Vietnam. India in the late 50s or 60s, not much different from Sri Lanka situation at that time. Of course, they had Nobel Prize winners, but they had the policy of science and technology, and led by the IT sector, thanks to Sri Nehru's vision, long-term vision. And now they have become global leaders in the IT. Okay? Now, South Korea had a different approach that was led by companies at the very start. So there's a saying, we turn the brain drain to brain gain. There's a South Korean statement. So there is another success story, but led by private companies in South Korea. Now, I remember in 80s, Professor C.N.R. Rao, he was the chief guest at the SLAS sessions in Colombo. He said, advise Sri Lankans, you have missed the IT bus, you have missed the BT bus, biotechnology, don't miss the NT bus. That was the starting point during Professor Tisavitharana's time as the minister that laid the foundation for this FinTech, which I was also involved in the initial stages, and then let the Veranja and the team took over.
Sorry, Mama.
So end up with a very success story of these, slow release fertilizer. That is a very huge success for Sri Lanka. But at the same time, that was successful because of the dedication of the scientists and then the team. But after that, we don't see that kind of thing continuing. I mean, that setup is already dismantled. Now it's owned by a finance company. So it's a completely different situation now at the FinTech. Now, another point is, in Sri Lanka, we don't have this postdoc category. Right, Veranja? We don't have postdocs. That is a very unique situation in Sri Lanka, because postdocs are the category who will help to interface between the academia and the research sector in universities. And also, we don't have in Sri Lanka the R&D and commercialization sector, which is very weak, virtually non-existent. I know personally how hard Veranja was trying to get patents for some of these findings. So we don't have an established R&D and commercialization phase in Sri Lanka, including the IPR and the patenting facilities. I mean, now only things are getting set up slowly. Also, we must thank Veranja for establishing also this tier system for the universities. That was a very, very difficult, bitter pill for the most of the academic staff, because Sri Lankan universities are mostly teaching universities, except a few big universities engaged in science. Others are mostly teaching universities. I mean, not much different from schools. So we must try to change this culture and focus on research and develop R&D commercialization phase in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshman. Any comments, Veranja?
Yeah, Lakshman, thank you. Lakshman and I go a very, very long time.
You get tired. I can see that.
And we have I think we have together sat in so many committees in Colombo that I've lost the count. But I think Lakshman knows the difficulties that I had in getting that tier system introduced. And when, after 10 years of struggle, when the UGC finally issued a circular, I was amazed. And thanks to Professor Malik Ransinger, who was more practical than I was theoretical, and knew how to do it. But it has worked in the system, but it hasn't worked to the extent that we expected it to. The whole idea is to be at the 0th level, tier 1, which index is 0. We want to monitor those scientists going up the ladder. That was the whole purpose of doing that. Not for tier 4 star people to enjoy saying, I'm a big shot, I'm now tier 4. So that was not the purpose. The other one, I hope it happens, but I don't know. There are a number of expats, Sri Lankans in this audience, based on the questions that were asked. I think you need to be concerned. I know all of you are concerned about Sri Lanka, whether you're there or not, or here, that we have lost. We have lost a huge group of 30 to 40 PhD scientists out of this country during our economic crisis 2 years ago. That would be tough to replace. And, we don't get, now I teach a field of chemistry. There are about 35 students. I do 3rd and 4th year lectures. Virtually 100% end up in the US doing their PhDs, right? Never to return. So if somebody asked me, what have you done in teaching in Sri Lanka? My answer would be, I have sent about 800 kids to the US to do their PhD. They have good lives now because they live there. That's not a bad answer to give, I understand. But if you look at the private sector, Colombo jobs, you can hardly find a chemistry qualified person because no undergraduate ever stays in Sri Lanka in chemistry. No one. For patriotic reasons, people go into civil service and teaching, but other than that, there are no people. And the number returning is only about 2 out of 100 will return. 2 out of 100. And that 2 is like me, who chose to teach and send those kids back there again. So, that's another vulnerability, a gap that exists, which we need to fill of all the gaps that I mentioned tonight. Thank you, Chula.
No, you're right, Veranja, because I think the retaining people and attracting people to stay is the key thing. I'll give you one example because, say, for example, the US, I was traveling once for a conference and my fellow passenger was a F-15 pilot. And by the end of the journey, he said, why don't you move to US? I'll give you a job in research. So they don't want anything. They said, we'll give you a house, we'll give you a car, we'll give you a place to work. And that's how it goes. So it's the attitude. So people can make that. Sri Lanka, of course, if you do something like that, you will have a huge crisis in your hand to deal with it. So this is the attitude that needs to be promoted. That's what I think the politicians also need to understand. There's one more question. I hope you can manage that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
From Dinara.
Hey, Dinara. How are you?
Dinara?
If you,
Yeah.
Muted.
Muted.
Okay. I'll say, I've sent a message to you asking to unmute. Dinara?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Professor, I have to ask you a question. Professor, you are my favorite speaker, right?
God.
Okay. A few comments. I think, at the start of the meeting, I think the host was mentioning about a science museum. I think that's a great idea. I think Sri Lanka should have a science museum for sure. But then I feel like, I don't know, you should probably talk about this. I feel like the Sri Lankan professors, especially academics, you guys are too focused on getting publications, H indexes, and I think we are too focused on that. My word would be, a little bit about going too much about that. We are thinking too much about that because a few weeks ago, Professor, Phil Barron, right? I went to a talk and three scientists talk. No one, he was never, he and the other scientists were not introduced as, this is his H index, this is the number of publications. He was introduced as, this is Phil Barron, and these are the discoveries that he did in the last couple of months, XYZ, right? We are too focused on that because right now, in Boston, at least, the biotech is heavy, right? We hire people based on their skill set. So in Sri Lanka also, we should think about developing the skill set. Skill set means it's not only the number of publications, it's about how you present at a presentation. How would you answer questions scientifically with technical vocabulary, right? These things are not there because I see a lot of PhDs even writing to us for jobs, and because they fail on jobs because they are not developed fully, but they have a good publication record. So that's one of my thinking. And also the other thing I want to mention is the brain drain, right? We've been talking about that for the last 10 years, right? I think what we should focus on, it has been failed, okay? Because scientists here in US, Canada, or any other place, they are not going to come back. We have to accept that ugly truth. So how would you solve this problem? We should generate more scientists, right? At bachelor's level or master's level. You develop them, let them go, because they will come to US, they will get good jobs, they will send money, because we are trying to stop them or we are trying to recruit them. That's a failed strategy. I don't think that's going to work, because even Dubai, right? My boss is one of the best peptide chemists. He went to Dubai to open a research facility, and he said it was amazing. All the facilities are there. They have like 100 mass specs. And I said, hey, do you want to go there and work? So he's like, no way. For any amount of money, he will not go from MIT to Dubai, some research institute to work there. They're not. If Dubai can't do this, do you think Sri Lanka can do it? No way.
No.
Yeah. So think about that, because we have to
Yeah.
produce more scientists. Like, get a good science museum, right? Encourage people to do more science at A-level and bachelor's level, master's level, and not even PhD. Don't get PhDs. If you have a good master's project, you can apply for a PhD and come here. That's how
Yeah.
let the brain drain happen. And let the brain drain happen. That's what I like.
That's your field. So, for those who have not known what Dinara's contribution to Sri Lanka is, he did return after his PhD from Purdue, and he worked with me in developing advanced pharmaceutical ingredient facility at Slimtech. He was there for 2 to 3 years, and we developed together. That's another success story I should have talked about at Slintech, is that we did synthesize. When you say API synthesis, I want people in the medical area to understand API synthesis is not doing a synthesis in the lab. You got to synthesize each step. How many drops of this reagent you add? What's the exothermicity? You got to do all that. So Dinara, he led that group with me. I was involved in it. So fortunately, kind of driving it with Dinara. And we did synthesize levothyroxine. We have a process development of levothyroxine and beclomethasone. And we did tell the government, can you stop import substitutions? We can make it here. But that is another project that died at Slintech, and Dinara left afterwards. Slintech is a great institute that did so many good things, and I wish it good luck. It's still doing really well, but sometimes lack of continuity can affect the best of organizations in the world, and Slintech is no exception. So Dinara, thank you. I think you're right that we need to encourage people to do their masters and so on here. And then one statistic I know for sure is that Chula mentioned that I have produced 27 PhDs. Of them, 90% are still in Sri Lanka, working in universities and in private companies. So all great countries must produce their own PhDs. The head of Indian Space Agency is an Indian PhD, right? It's not a US PhD. So this is what we're not a great country in terms of people, number of people, but in terms of our intellectual prowess, we are a great country. The Sri Lankans do amazingly well abroad, amazingly well, right? They're like a force to reckon with when they work abroad. So we are that. And I think we need to encourage our local PhDs. And most of them who are probably in this audience are working productively, happily, running their families with good incomes in Sri Lanka. So that's something I have done. So I've sent out 850 students to the US, and I have kept 27 students in Sri Lanka to work here. The ratio is not great, but I understand. I hope you understand the principle and the concept.
Thank you, Veranja, and Dinara also for that highlighting various issues. And I must really thank you, Veranja, because today I have worn you out with all these questions and everything, and you were talking on this. And in summary, it was such a fantastic grassroots application of an overall view, which doesn't come from anybody that easy. And I think we should make use of it. I might take it up at a later date again as we follow up. We'll try to
Yeah.
write it up as well as a general publication, not a peer review one, but for people to understand what we need to do.
Yeah, if you
And
can,
maybe that will promote the politicians as well to engage a little bit more.
yeah,
So,
as somebody suggested, Chula, if you can make a synopsis, a video or whatever, and send it to the Honorable Minister of Science and Technology, Krishanta Abesena,
Yeah.
who spends a lot of time on science-related issues. He's a person, I mean, you would think, a person like me, I'm just a chairman of a statutory body. How often do you meet the minister? I meet him very often, right? He's fully engaged, geared. Look, I mean, I'm not saying that in the next 4 years we are going to do great, but this start that this new government has started is different to what I've seen before. I'm not, this is a political comment I'm making. Totally. You should, Chula, if you can send a synopsis to the minister saying such an event happened on this date and this is the guy who did the talk, that would be great.
I'll try to do that. Thank you so much. But we continue as we usually do. And I hope you'll have some information or thoughts on AI, which I think is both ways. But we need to engage it as early as possible, not wait. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about that. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everybody staying all this time to listen to Professor Veranja, and also take the message forward, promote your researchers, and also openings for your well-beings as well. So you probably have to fight a little bit for it as well. Okay, great. Thank you so much, and good night to everybody.
Chula, can you share your email address, Chula? Please.
Yeah, email address will be, I'll say it, I have to write a slide again.
Okay.
So it's admin
on the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
At Sri Lanka Leads. It's easy. Sri Lanka Leads, one word, .com.
What's the first word at before at?
Admin is just admin at Sri Lanka Leads.com.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So this video will be there as well on our website in about, say, 2 hours time. Yeah, great. Okay. Thank you and good night to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.